Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today we will have the 7th webinar related with one of the projects that our club is involved. Love that gives you wings. That means warn, inspire, nurture, gain, share. From imperfect to more than perfect love. Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today we will have the 7th webinar related with one of the projects that our club is involved. Love that gives you wings. 11 years ago, the husband of Rita introduced me to her. It was friendship at the first sight. We are very different from one another, but we share the same mission, that is, help others, particularly the most vulnerable. 2 years later, Rita invited me to join the charter of the club SE Lisboa Caravela. And during all these years, we worked together in many projects. And it is my pleasure to invite my amazing and dear friend, Rita Nogueira Ramos, to begin her presentation. Rita, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for taking your time to be here today. My name is Rita Nogueira Ramos. I am Portuguese and I am a lawyer. For a world free of violence, taking bold action towards gender parity. This is a very ambitious title, I suppose. Imagining a world where we care for each other so much that we never harm each other. Well, maybe you've heard a lot of that. And so I'm going to say something which is not so new for you. But I really hope at least one idea, one thought will be useful to you somehow in your personal, professional life or the life of your beloved one. So that's what moves me to come here and speak to you today. Before starting such an important topic as violence against women, let me share who I am. Next slide, please. Okay. So, as you see in this slide, why volunteering? We ask ourselves why we should volunteer. Volunteering is a two-way street. You give to others, you help, but be sure that you receive back much more than what you have given. So this is something which, of course, moves someone and is amazing. That is why universities engage nowadays their students in volunteering, because they know that employers will evaluate the skills of the candidates on the basis of these requisites. A person who has been volunteering is much more prepared than the one who hasn't done that. So for more than 28 years, a big part of the hours of each day, every day, many weekends included, I have dedicated myself to being a volunteer. I first joined the fantastic refugees organization when I finished my law graduation. It was the Portuguese Refugee Council, a partner of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, also called as UNHCR. Well, there I can say that I learned a lot about human beings and human life saving, about the importance of caring for the other, and of course, no matter the education, the nationality and the background, what's the most important thing, the most important goal is really learning how to be caring for each other. We were, for example, there when it was the genocide in Rwanda, where just in 100 days, less than 4 months, 800,000 people were killed by the Hutus, an ethnic group. So some came as asylum seekers to Portugal, and we were there to receive them, to interview them, and to find them a safe place to stay. I was amazed by the level of education that Rwandese had. In fact, many of them were university teachers, economists. And it was a wrong idea that in Rwanda, everyone was very poor, the level of education was very low. Also, I was there when it was Liberia's civil war, and which ended in 1997 and killed some 250,000 people. And when Sierra Leone was devastated, we were also there. We were confronted with the children soldiers. You cannot imagine how it is to see a young boy aged 10, 11, 12 making use of Kalashnikovs. So I was there also when it was the Kosovo War. It was so many years of experience. I was young and it felt great to be doing humanitarian work. So I now dedicate my volunteer work to the most wonderful organization you may ever know about, Soroptimist International of Europe. To show you who we are, let us watch this small video.
I am a Soroptimist. Oh, haven't you heard? Well, we've been here for 100 years now, and I'm here to spread the word. We stand up for women through awareness, advocacy, and action. You see, in 1921, a group of women set off a chain reaction. We are a global voice for women, but we don't just say, we do. We are fighting for equality and human rights, and we're fighting for women just like you. With a bright past and a brilliant future, we are active, vibrant, and diverse. You see, if it weren't for us taking a stand each day, the world for women would look much worse. We are women just like you. We are sisters, daughters, and wives. We are women inspiring action, and we are women transforming lives.
Energizing, isn't it? So you can move to the next slide, please. So as you've heard, Soroptimists are women working as volunteers and participating in the decision-making of so many forums. We are 31,500 members just in Europe, in 44 European countries, and altogether, in the 5 corners federations, we are more than 72,000 members. Soroptimist International of Europe holds consultative status at the United Nations ECOSOC, participatory status at the Council of Europe, and active membership with the European Women's Lobby. And to contribute to the work of the OSCE, we also have a representative. We can now move to the next slide, please. What can Soroptimist volunteering mean? We basically support women and girls to achieve their individual and potential, and we realize the aspirations of each woman as an equal voice, creating strong, peaceful communities around us. For that goal, Soroptimist clubs implement projects and advocacy. We complete 100 years this year, and we are very happy for this celebration. Let us identify problems and bring solutions. I am sure that in particular moments in your lives, we saw one or more cases that we thought, oh, this is terrible, oh, this is violence. And we feel so sad about it. Most of the times, you lose the case, you never more hear about the situation, and you think it is a private matter. So let them solve it. It's not true. But very few of us continue to think deep about these cases. You can ask yourselves many questions. Does she suffer physical violence or psychological violence, or both? Did it happen just once? Or did this violence occur many times? Were there any protections measures taken? Were they effective? Were they quick enough? Was the degree of belief given to the victim when she told what was she being subject to others, to doctors, to police forces, to the judicial system. So did she have all the support that she needed? Was she severely injured? Did injuries affect her social and emotional condition? What happened afterwards? 1 year, 2 years after, to her, to her children? Did she get a job? Was she balanced in life psychologically? And the question that people normally forget, what happened to the perpetrator? Did he marry again? Did he repeat the behaviors to other victims? Did he get mental treatment? Was he mentally, was this mentally disease condition identified? So identifying problems and bringing solutions, I repeat, is very important. The next slide, please. So, what precisely Soroptimists do is to continue to be there for women in need in their countries. They go to the local communities, search for the fragilities, and they try to prevent, to protect, to denounce, and to inform. They implement thousands of projects. They advocate, raising awareness and providing life-saving information. And especially during crises, as with the situation of COVID-19, women's civil society organizations have been very important because they were at the front line. So if you ask me, yes, non-governmental organizations are vital to eliminate violence against women and domestic violence. We are now prepared to look at the agenda and start. Let us ask ourselves these questions, and I'm going to try to give you some answers about them. The first one, what is violence against women? This is a devastating problem, we all know. Violence is defined by the World Health Organization as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. So first of all, you can see that violence is a crime. And why do we speak about violence specifically against women and domestic violence or gender-based violence? Indeed, women, even though they represent half of the European population, so almost 50%, they are still facing many types of inequalities solely based on the fact that they are women. There's no other reason. It's just because they are women. The majority of such violent acts are carried out by men against women. And it is done in their immediate social environment, most often by partners or ex-partners. Although methodologies vary, an overview of surveys of investigations which have been conducted by social specialists suggests that across countries, 1/5 to 1/4 of all women have experienced physical violence at least once during their adult lives. And more than 1/10 have suffered sexual violence involving the use of force. So figures, including, for example, stalking, are as high as 45%, which is amazing. As you can see in these slides, which I myself took the picture to something that I had, an object I had at home, we can see that violence is a violation of human rights. It was a serious problem much earlier than COVID-19. COVID-19 has spread all forms of violence, and during the past year and a half, we have seen severe difficulties for the problem because, particularly with domestic violence and cyber violence, the system was not prepared to respond. Of course, people were imprisoned in their own homes, first during lockdowns there was deficient information and acknowledgement of cases. And secondly, of course, it is difficult to access and to realize the operational response to many critical and often life-saving services. In a way, the pandemic aggravated mental health. So this is even more serious because it was aggravated by the condition of the perpetrator, the emotional condition, and the fragility of women. And they became imprisoned at home, the place they should be and feel the most safe. They were more exposed and less protected than ever. You can find information that helpline calls increased 60% in some countries. I heard that from the Secretary General of GREVIO. In another way, due to the COVID-19 seriousness, healthcare, police forces, hospitals were having another focus, which was to help the COVID-19 patients, and that was normal. So most NGOs working in the field, insufficiently funded, could not count on regular support to plan and to prepare equipment in time enough to protect women and children in shelters or elsewhere. We can see the data in the next slide. This slide is very important because it shows its numbers from the UN, and it shows how the numbers have increased, for example, by 30% in France, Cyprus, Singapore, and also in other countries, 25% in Argentina, and in Canada, Germany, Spain, United Kingdom, United States. So this is just for the record. You can search these numbers in the UN Women website. Let me talk about why there is a prevalence of violence for so many years. It's about stereotypes. We should recognize the fact that violence affects disproportionately women, and that is based on unequal power relations between women and men, and on male oppression exerted over women. This is a principle which is also set in the explanatory report of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. This convention is very important. You have heard about it for sure. It's the Istanbul Convention. It's the most important landmark of violence against women and domestic violence. And gender stereotypes play a very key role in perpetuating unequal power between men and women. What are gender stereotypes? They are the wrong but intricate assumptions and language that is passed from generations to generations, which differentiates the roles of women and men, saying what women can do and cannot do in the society, at home, what they can say, how they can dress, and so on. So it is an assumption that keeps women as inferior, subordinated, everywhere, at home, in the workplace, everywhere. So because of that, some women get out of being participating in important and active decision fields of the society, and they let themselves segregate due to structural factors, including sometimes close links and the relation of dependency between perpetrator and victim, as well as lack of appropriate support, and second, victimization, which happens a lot. Victims just stay silent because they think there's no better place to be, in spite of the fear of being subject to violence. And they also fear for their children. This is why we call it the shadow pandemic, the silent pandemic. And the Secretary General on the 8th of April last year worried about the numbers and the increase, made an appeal to all states, which gave origin to a group of friends. It's called the Group of Friends, with more than 140 countries of the United Nations being working actively to find means to stop violence. So challenging harmful gender stereotypes in order to prevent violence is very important. And this process is made of years of work. Experts have studied it, and legislators, and it's still something that stays as a barrier in cultural, religious, or socially communities which are very strong. To combat it, states must establish obligations. So, you know, men's violence against women should be discussed, in my opinion, within the framework of all forms of violence and in an holistic view. And it should be discussed the causes and also the beginning of these problems in order to solve it. Let me show you how experts see across the world the problems which are stopping gender equality, and violence against women is certainly one of it. You can find the indicators listed on the right side of this slide, and you can also find the places and countries where the level of violence against women is much higher. So, in fact, across the world, it varies a lot depending to the culture and traditions of each country. There are discrepancies in protection, which are provided by the judicial, social, and health authorities. And without intervention, states are likely to continue adopting diverse national measures, which is not good, because it leads to inconsistency in the standards, to different forms of looking at the subject, different forms of abolishing it. So to put an end to male violence against women, it's important to take a comprehensive action in all the countries to find a paradigm for societies. So what forms of violence do we know? This slide is taken from the Istanbul Convention website. I was looking at it and I felt that this is just a few of the forms of violence. I'm going to mention to you a list, and maybe you yourselves can find others. Intimate partner violence, domestic violence, collective violence, family violence, child maltreatment, bullying, sexual violence, elder abuse, violence against persons with disabilities, workplace violence, armed conflict, terrorism, genocide, trafficking in human beings or their organs, persecution on the grounds of belonging to an ethnic group, political persecution, violence against journalists, violence in sports, violence in the parliament, feminine genital mutilation, child marriage, and cyber violence. So we could spend hours with you thinking together on all forms of violence. In fact, violence has been explicitly identified as a major and growing public health problem, and so it is considered as a mental disease by the World Health Organization. The majority of cases are domestic violence and intimate partner violence, but of course, others are also taking a place in unfortunately, as trafficking in human beings and sexual exploitation as feminine genital mutilation. And with the migratory flows from Middle East and Southern Asia, asylum seekers flows from Western, Eastern and Northern regions of Africa, there are new problems. So the Istanbul Convention states how we could consider there is violence. For example, when there is coercion or threats, by causing fear or lack of safety, by committing acts of physical violence, non-consensual acts of sexual nature, forcing a child or an adult to some place or some country where that person is at risk, excising, infibulating, abortion without prior informed consent, surgery to end capacity to reproduce, unwanted verbal, non-verbal, physical, sexual conduct that intimidates. So there are so many forms, emerging also forms of violence. So this is an image which shows the prevalence of online violence nowadays. And in fact, this form of violence is only one of the new emerging forms of violence. Intergenerational violence, for example, we are worried about it because specific aspects of intergenerational violence, like violence against parents or against older persons in the family settings, they are not addressed by the general measures, and they need to be. The problems of COVID-19 isolation, which increased so much online violence, and we now can speak about cyber stalking, cyber harassment, illegal sharing of private information, such as photos, and recruitment and exploitation through the online means, hate speech. So there's a lot of problems coming from online isolation and communication through means which are not direct. So the European Union is concerned with this subject, and to fit for the digital age and competition, they are trying to set corporate social responsibility and a corporate behavior online, so that there is a response to these new forms of violence. This is the question: how can violence stop? And I am very convinced of this answer I am giving here. Although normally this is the most difficult answer to give. A lot can be done to stop violence. It can be done by all stakeholders, by each of us, civil society, communities, NGOs, companies, employers, media, federal or international level. And of course, we should not forget the main actor, the person who can and should make violence stop, which is the victim. We normally think it's the perpetrator. It's not, it's the victim. To understand the victims, one needs to understand the roots of inferiority and work from there. And this is the most difficult thing to do, because it's years of investigation and history. But it is the victim who needs to make the trigger decision to what she wants for her life. So enabling and empowering women to speak loudly about the issue of violence and about sexual harassment in the workplace, in schools, in social media is fundamental. A woman needs to be supported, to be educated, to have self-esteem, and to talk about the problem of violence. Victims in domestic of violence against women and domestic violence need to be timely informed of their rights. of the services they can turn to, and then make a follow-up. There is a cycle of violence, so I'm going to show you the patterns of the cycle of violence, which happens normally in the life of a victim and the abuser. First, there is tension, and the person thinks that she cannot say anything that might raise the dynamics of violence, so she keeps silent, and whenever she speaks, she's afraid. Then there is the explosion, sometimes for nothing, and then the victim comes, the perpetrator comes and says he promises it will never happen again. That is a strategy, of course. So the cycle is broken by the woman herself, or through some intervention, sometimes too late, because women are many times injured, and ultimately they can be killed by the perpetrators. What can NGOs and states do in this setting? What are they doing, and what can they do? You can see here a list of ideas of what NGOs can do and how they are close to the subjects. Of course, NGOs, in my opinion, are key, but states are also key. So the most important expertise that our European NGO, Soroptimist International, provides is being close to the victims, so they have a clear perception of the context. We do grassroots work, so in fact we know better because we are there, we act, we speak to the victims and to the authorities, implementing thousands of projects. Our expertise results on work and projects, hands-on. One critique that I do is that we seldom address the perpetrators. I said that before. And we should reverse this problem. We should be closer to the origin of violence, address the problem of perpetrators, treat the mental illness that gives origin to violence, try to find a positive thinking to implement ways for people to be happier, because we cannot imprison perpetrators as the number is so high, and that is not a solution. So what I can tell you is that each of us as a volunteer can add value by informing a lot about escape plan samples, about emergency lines and helplines, about shelters. There are even Soroptimists having shelters run by them. So we have a role in changing attitudes and stereotypes, traditions, customs, patterns, where women are treated as inferior. And calling for more support services is very important, because they are in no way sufficient. Social services and psychiatry are slow. There is the need to provide trauma treatment at the hospitals. And of course, it makes no sense that it is the victim to be moved away from home instead of the perpetrator. So the perpetrator, being not the victim, should not stay at home. Should be him to be going to the shelter and be treated. So a lot of damage occurs, and we know that lives of women are really dependent of these measures of the states and NGOs. How can we lead the way to a life free of violence? It's listed here and we can read it. There's no need to repeat a lot of what I'm thinking, but it is about a positive action. How does the law enforcement and justice authorities treat victims? Do they do it in a gender sensitive and in a child-friendly manner? Not always, I'm afraid. So we have to say that all the sectors dealing with violence need to treat victims the right way to avoid second victimization when people go to the hospitals, to the police, to the courts. And the authorities or services should ensure that risk factors like safety concerns are really taken care of. Sometimes, as you know, action is not quick enough and not meaningful enough. People are abandoned, women. The support services are available in principle in most of the countries, in the European Union at least, but they are not always implemented. For example, there is a lack of funding. And so there is a lot to do. In Europe, we can say that in the last years, the subject was put under spotlight in various ways. Many measures were taken, for example, awareness raising, training of the relevant professionals, teaching, and working together with perpetrators and boys and men. So education is, of course, a very important step forward. I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I would like to tell you something about the Istanbul Convention now. So if you could please move to the next slide. Thank you very much. As said, violence against women happens very, very often in Europe. 1/3 of women in the EU, or 62 million women, have experienced physical or sexual violence since the age of 15. Every second, a woman has been confronted with one or more forms of sexual harassment, and 1 in 5 women have experienced stalking. So the Council of Europe, which is a group of 47 countries in Europe, so it is outside the scope of the European Union, in 2011 made an agreement to stop violence against women, and it was signed in Istanbul in Turkey. 45 states, and also, in addition, the European Union signed it. So we have in the EU, all member states, the 27, and the EU itself. The EU signed, but out of the member states, only 21 of the 27 have ratified the convention. We are worried because not ratifying the convention so far brings the lack of coherence in the methodology that needs to be given to the subject. The states not ratifying are 6: Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovakia. And so far, the European Union didn't ratify, and one of the reasons is because it is difficult to approach some of the EU countries which have traditional culture very entrenched, and they do not accept some of the obligations. So this section by the EU needs to be done. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence sets standards for comprehensive measures, and it represents a very important multidisciplinary response. In 10 years, for example, we can say that it has created very important legislative changes in the state parties. The convention is a key tool for women organization because it recognizes the work of non-governmental organization, and so it establishes the financial support and the cooperation with these organizations. And it sets very important notions. For example, the notion of gender, which is a differentiation that society makes between women and men. And women and girls should feel more protected with these instruments. We can see settled in this instrument how to prevent, how to protect, how to prosecute, and make the coordinated policies that are needed. For example, the Istanbul Convention sets the number of shelters that should exist in certain areas. So not only special support is needed to harmonize the measures in the EU member states, but for example, in what concerns the European Union, the ratification should be a bold step. You have certainly heard there are countries stepping back on the Istanbul Convention. It came as a bomb when it was announced that Turkey's President Erdogan decided to withdraw from it in the end of March. Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, and Slovakia are also facing a lot of opposition from within the government. And in the case of Bulgaria, it was declared the Istanbul Convention as unconstitutional. And this backlash is mainly done within the parties in the government positions, also by men's organizations, which defend the traditional roles of women. And some are blaming the Istanbul Convention for something which makes no sense at all. For example, the rising of divorces. In countries as Croatia, there was a serious attempt to delay the ratification, but it was unsuccessful. So we need to understand that the Istanbul Convention is not a wrong instrument. On the contrary, everyone needs to read the Istanbul Convention, to learn about its obligations for the states, and to see the aspects it contains. For example, the obligation for states to adopt laws covering different forms of violence, addressing key elements of violence, and, for example, taking into account criminal laws which introduce the lack of consent of the victim as an element rather than the use of force. Also criminalizing psychological violence, which before didn't exist, introducing the concept of coercive control as an aggravating circumstances in penalties, and a lot of measures developing national plans, strategies with funding and improved data, and the budget, specific budgets for shelters, for helplines, for social support service. So when there is awareness of this importance of this, or the importance of this instrument, the states then ratifying it need to comply with its obligations, and that's what some of the countries are delaying to do. I don't know if we can now see a small video.
I am a Soroptimist. Oh, haven't you?
Thank you very much, Yvonne. So let's go to the last slide of this presentation. Very well. So you see, women are too traumatized by violence. So further work is required, and we need to address the structural causes of violence. It is vital that the EU ratifies the Istanbul Convention. And it is also important that the European Union and also internationally, men's violence is considered as a Euro crime. It is gradually implemented, but not obligatory or binding, to provide training in the area of labor. And so should be compulsory for employers to be trained about these issues. There is the need for core funding directed to women's independent organizations to strengthen democratic societies. And of course, existing measures should be checked against the Istanbul Convention, compared if they are being respected or not. And finally, all the support needs to come to the victim when she claims her rights. She should never feel that she is being a second victim. And finally, data collection. There is a lot of numbers and statistics, but there is no harmonized criteria, and it's needed across all member states. We should analyze and classify all the elements and numbers leading to recommendations and conclusions so that they are realistic. Other initiatives are important, such as educational programs. And so I want to congratulate the initiative of all the webinars that you are conducting. I think so far 7 webinars. It is a very good contribute, an important contribute that you are offering to societies. This is a platform of education. And in conclusion, I would say that the fact that women's organizations are experts on men's violence against women and girls should be and have an institutionalized saying in public decision making, which means that governments should ask NGOs what they think about it. We will get there. So to finish this session, I would like us together to do 1 minute of silence for all the victims that, and you can think of someone in particular, but I would like us to do 1 minute for 1 woman and 1 children you know of who are victims of violence, and also the ones who didn't survive. Let us do it in solidarity. May this minute's silence start now, please. So thank you very much for your participation today. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Okay, Yvonne, may I go ahead? Because I don't want to be the first one. But
yes, of course you can. You can, Lydia.
Okay, I put it in the chat, but in the chat it's too long. But I will first, I'd like to congratulate Rita for your approach to this presentation of violence as a violation of human rights and violence as a crime. You refer then a lot of forms of violence. You refer some kind of 24, but could be 50, could be 100. But what, for me, I'd like to stress is that you refer emerging forms of violence. And among the emergence forms of violence, you referred intergenerational violence. Parents in relation to children, parents or against their own parents. So that means violence at home, within the family. And you know that we are in an aging society. I put in the chat numbers that I'm not going to refer. We are moving towards aged society, and because of economic reasons also, many of these elderly people are living in families. And many of them, or most of them, are women, because if you look into life expectancy, for instance, in Portugal, there is quite a difference between the life expectancy for men and for women. So my question I address to you is, you as a Vice President of the European Federation of Soroptimism, until now, you refer of violence against women, domestic violence, violence against girls. What happened? When is the Soroptimist International addressing violence against elderly people? Because, as I said, we are becoming elderly society. Most of them are women. And I don't hear anything from Soroptimism to address this issue of violence against elderly people. You know that there are a lot of societies that use violence within the house or abandoned the elderly. I witnessed myself in São Tomé, when when people get gray hair, they are assimilated to witches and they are abandoned. There are special organizations in São Tomé to take care of elderly people, as I said, most of them women, that are abandoned by their families. And this is nowadays, it's not in old cultures, ancient culture. So I wonder, Soroptimism.
Thank you, Lydia. If I can answer you, yes, Soroptimist International already focused this issue for some time. We know that older women account for more than a half of the global population, and that there are half of the population aged 60 or above, and 61% of those are aged 80 years old or above. So we know that this is a matter of concern, and as an organization calling for attention to so many issues, we are also worried about this. You can look at the website of Soroptimist International. There is a position statement which has been written about aging, and also about elderly widows. So these two focuses are being part of our work. We support programs related to older women, including, for example, healthcare, social care, recovering from abuse, and we lobby governments to ensure social protection measures in place for older women. We have been working against the gender stereotypes of older women, because there is a tendency to look at age as a problem, and to look at youth as a positive thing. And so normally the concepts are put one against the other, which is wrong, and even very lacking humanity. We think that a person growing and having more age should be respected, treated with care, with attention, with recognition, and sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes young people wrongly look at elderly people as a problem, as they discriminate against older people, and they don't understand that the experience and the knowledge that older people can bring has moved the society forward and brings a very key role for education of the young people. So we need to provide this knowledge, to share this understanding, and to go away from these also stereotypes of looking at aged people as a negative thing and looking at youth as the only thing that matters. Being young, looking well, being beautiful, and instead of having the wrinkles of knowledge. So I think you can look for some of the materials that we have on the website of Soroptimist International relating to that concept.
Yeah, thank you, Rita. But my question is more violence, because there is also a lot of violence against elderly people. It's not only domestic violence, you talk about women. And women, and I would like to broaden the concept to elderly, domestic living at home. At home, that means with the family. Okay, but thank you. I don't want to monopolize this. I hope that we progress as Soroptimists.
I think that we have to thank very much to Rita Nogueira Ramos. It was an incredible session. Thank you very much for your time, for your presentation, and I hope to see you very soon when we have the next webinar. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yvonne and the Club Caravela. I'm very honored to share what I know about violence, and will be glad to help you whenever you need.